All right, we're going to get started. Couple things you probably heard, most of you, at least most of this. I finally got the new version of Swift on the machines and the new operating system on the machine after a lot of trying. All right, so my program blows up, but I want to show you my program, and it's out there. What I've done is in the in-class folder for this class. Okay, in the in-class folder for this class, there's a folder out there with today's date on it. In there are two things. One of them is my viewcontroller.swift file, which is what you see on the screen right now. So I'm going to go over that with you. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing that's there is the handout that I just gave you. It's a PDF of it. All right, and we're going to start going over that PDF. We're going to look at it a little bit today, but we're going to start really going over it next week. And that's what we're going to do for the rest of the semesters. Hopefully we'll finish up as much as we can on that project. I was talking to John this morning. What my plans are, just so you know, is come the first day of class, whatever that is in spring, January, whatever, the first day, we're going to start writing, at 1 o'clock, we're going to start writing Android apps. At 3 o'clock, we're going to start writing Swift apps or iOS apps right away. And my hope is that we're going to write somewhere between 3 and 6 of those, all right, as a class. You will be responsible for writing each one of those. We'll write them as a class. I'll give you the code. But we're going to do as many as we can in about no more than 12 weeks and hopefully in about 9 or 10. And then once we get done with that, then you're going to basically, you're going to give me a requirements document like you've done for other classes. You're going to write your own app. Either you're going to write the same app in both Android and iOS, or you're going to write a different one in each. That's up to you. But that's going to be what the rest of that class is about. All right? So I wanted to show you my code, and I looked at it last night. I'm trying to figure out why it breaks, but it does break. All right? One thing, I mentioned this to John this morning, with some of the stuff that's in here, it looks a little different than it did when I brought it up last night, because what the system does is I brought the file up and it says this was written using this was written using an older version of Swift. Do you want to upgrade it, basically? Do you want to upgrade your project? And I said yes. So it kept coming in there, and basically every single time it found something, I just said just fix it. I just did the automatic fix. So there's some stuff in there that I've got to look at, and I'm not sure if that's why it doesn't work or not. You can run it, but as soon as you put a guess in, it blows up. All right? And I already have some ideas as to what that could be, but I'm going to look at that, and hopefully I'll get some time to look at it this weekend, but I don't know. All right. This should all make sense to you right now, as far as how we hooked on and took those labels and that text field, and we hooked them up actually to the view controller. That's something we shouldn't really have to talk about anymore. That should make sense. All right. Next, we have our variables. One of the things that was in here that I found interesting is one of the changes that I was asked to make, and I'll show it to you in just a second, was there was something in one of my functions that I had done with a var. And the system came back and said, no, that really should be a let. So they gave me the advice to change it, so I did. All right. Again, is that why it's blowing up? I don't know. All right. All of this stuff that's in here should make sense. Remember that according to Swift standards, I shouldn't be actually taking those constants and making them uppercase. But I did anyway, because that's what we have been doing. It's not that it's wrong to do it, it's just considered not the best way of doing things. Does everybody get this? We talked about this before. I mentioned that the view did load is similar. It's not the same thing, but it's similar to a constructor that you have like in a Java program. So what we're saying is when it loads into memory, we want to generate a new random number. Does it make sense that I put that call in there? All right, and that's why I did. All right, most of the time in this did receive memory warning, you'll almost never put anything in there yourself. You're just letting the system call its own stuff. As it says, dispose of any resources that can be recreated. The only time that should be an issue is if you're using a mobile device and you're running low on battery or whatever it is. What the system will attempt to do will be to go through all the stuff that you have open and see what either you haven't used for a while or what could be closed so that the program could continue. Okay? I just found it an epiphany myself that it's like with the phone here. All right, if I hold down and just keep holding down, what happened eventually is it'll show me everything that's open. All right, and I show that to my wife, and she's like, "Wow, that's cool." She had like 100 things open on her phone because she never shut anything. She just open it up and leave it open. She was wondering why it was always so slow and didn't react well. Then she put it in airplane mode. All right, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't even know I did that. Well, somebody did it. You're the only one who uses the phone. All right. So then we've got the routines that I created. Like I said, this one right here blows up. If you remember when we first ran it, what I did was in each one of these, I just put a simple alert in there that said I was in the particular routine. Those all worked. Nothing blew up. All right. But the idea in here is what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set it up so that when they put something in that text field, or ideally they put something in that text field, all right, I'm checking it. First of all, I'm doing this. If it's not equal to nil, well, what's the opposite of it not being equal to nil? It's being equal to nil. Nil is null, meaning there's nothing in there. So if there is nothing in there, I just set my current guess equal to 50. And I said no guess made defaulting to 50. So there'd be a value in there. All right. But if I do hit this, if it's not equal to nil, what that meant was I wanted to take guess.text, which could be empty, which is why we've got the exclamation point there, and I want to convert it to an integer, but it still could be empty. All right. I didn't put that second exclamation point in there. That was one of the things that when it ran through the upgrade, that was one of the things that the system put in for me. All right. So again, if it's not nil, what I want to do is take whatever was in that text box, convert it to an integer, and stick it into my integer variable. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. All right. Well, once I've done that, I've made a guess. So I add 1 to my number of guesses. All right. Now, as it says, I want to take my number of guesses, and remember, that's part of the thing that I'm putting in there into my program. I've got a label that says number of guesses, and then there's another label where I'm going to put that in. That's what I'm doing here. Does that make sense? And that is just literally I hard-coded, and what did I do here? I did a cast. All right. Sometimes there's more than one way of doing it. All right. And it's interesting. I've been doing. I think I've told you I've been doing this series of presentations for Data Dimensions, and I did the last one. I taped it this morning. Last of 34 presentations. All right. And it's on buffer overflows. And what a buffer overflow is you've got an area of memory that's a certain size, and you try to stuff more stuff into it than the size is. All right? And there's two kinds of buffer overflows. There's a heap overflow. The other one's called the stack overflow. And I'd never thought about where stack overflow got its name before. I started to think about that today. All right. So I've done that. Now, as it says, I want to convert number. That's the number that we did way up on top there. That's the random number. All right? In order to be able to use that arc4 random, that random number had to be declared as being a uint 32, or a 32-bit integer. All right? But when I'm using it over here, I just want to use it as a regular integer. So x is a terrible name, but it's what I used. I said take number, which is a 32-bit int, cast it into a regular int, and make that x. This is, again, I had var here. The system told me to change it to let. All right? Then I want to check whatever guess the person made. That was from up here. That's the guess. So whatever guess they made, if it's less than 1, or it's greater than 100, then I want the text box to say out of range, because I made something too low or too high. Otherwise, if it's less than that number, so the guess was less, so let's say the number is 25 and I guess 50, too low. Otherwise, let's say the number is 50 is 25 and I guess 50, it's too high. So one of those things has to have happened, or I got it. And you'll notice every single thing that's in here, there's my initial if, and then I put all else ifs. I didn't put an else in there. So if for some reason something happens that's not caught in one of those cases, I don't know. What my program will do is indeterminate. I don't know. I don't think that can happen, which is why I wrote it like this. All right? Should I have written it like this? I don't know. All right? So again, the idea is, it says you guessed it. So, you know, I don't have to draw the interface anymore. You've seen it before. I've now made a guess. My number of guesses should be correct, and my status should be correct. But like I said, I can run this for you, but when I run it, as soon as I put a guess in there, it blows up. All right, my show rules. Now what I should be able to do, because it's been upgraded, I'm not going to do it right now, but what I should be able to do is go back in there, and that stuff that I showed you before in an earlier lecture when we used the UI Alert View Controller, that should work in here now. That's the way that you're supposed to do this. Using what you see up on the screen right there, you know, and I credit and thank Travis for his recommendation on that, using that alert view. That's considered old school to do that. In other words, that was what you did really in the days of Objective-C, although it still works. But it's not considered to be the best way of doing things today. All right? Then we had our clear GUI routine, which called clear all. And I mentioned this stuff to you before also. Most of the stuff that's in here should be pretty self-explanatory. I hard-coded a 0 in there so that when you clear the system for the number of guesses, there'll literally be a 0 in that label. That's all. This is the same thing as give focus. That's how you give focus in an iOS app. All right? You say the name of the field you want to go to. So self, which is like the word this that we've used in other languages. All right? Technically, all of this stuff that you see right here, all that stuff should work if I leave the self dot out. But if you look at Apple's own documentation, they recommend using self dot whenever you're in doubt. All right, so I kept it in there. And for the brackets, this is the way they typically show it. All right, is inside of brackets like that. So the become first responder means literally when I click the clear button, I want to make sure that my cursor is flashing inside of the guess routine, which should make sense because I'm about to probably make a new guess. All right. The exit, I mentioned this. I've had problems with that before. I didn't try this again last night. It was already almost 9:30 by the time I got all this stuff to work last night. All right, and everything was done loading and whatever. And you think, well, it's not that big a thing. I started it at about 1:30. All right. All right, so we've got in there, when we do a new game, we want to clear it out and generate a new random number. And then finally on the bottom of the screen, you see this is our generate random number. And this is something you're going to have to develop a comfort level with. Again, you know already that all functions start with the word func. You know that these functions that start with IB action means that they're going to be associated with something 99.9 times out of 100 with a button, but they can be associated with other things, a text box or whatever. But you also have to get used to this syntax. So this is not IB action, so this is a function that's going to be called from another function. Its name is generate random number. It requires no parameters, and that minus greater than sign means that it returns a uint32. All right. So again, what that is designed to do is arg4 random. If I leave it like this, I think I told you that before, if I leave the +1 off, it returns a random number between 0 and 99. All right, that's just the way it works. But to say the +1 changes it to 1 to 100. All right, and I've got to get better about this. You know, because I guess if I was an unbelievably picky, you know what, I could take off a lot of points for a lot of things. But when you have requirements and they say generate a random number between 1 and 100, and I run your program and there's a 0 in there, technically you did it wrong. I'm not saying, you know, but especially with a lot of the first year people. And we went through examples. I showed them exactly how to do it. And I said, and if you don't like doing it this way, and I showed them places in Stack Overflow where they could find out how to do it, or on W3 Schools where they could find out how to do it. All right. Any questions on that? Yes.
What's the import Darwin?
Okay, the question was at the top, what's the import Darwin? Well, when this stuff kept breaking, and then when I tried to do the simple exit and the exit broke, all right, I started going through Stack Overflow. And one of the things that said in there was, oh, if you're having problems with that, make sure you import Darwin.
Yeah.
All right. Didn't help any, but.
It made my exit work on mine.
Okay. Well, like I said, it might work on mine now too. All right. Because this what I'll have to do when I get time is either just remove all the code from this, keep the interface, which is probably what I'll do. Just keep the interface, remove every bit of code that's in there other than what you get with a new project. So the view did load line and the did receive memory warning, and get rid of everything else. Hook up everything again myself and see if I can get that to work with a new version of Swift. I don't know if that'll work or not, but I'll try that. All right. All right, so let's take a look at this. You'll notice it is 152 pages. That said, a lot of the stuff, especially at the beginning of this, we won't need to spend a lot of time on, because they talk about things like how stuff is, how variables are held internally, etc. And it's not that stuff is not important. It is. All right, it is important, but not that important for what we're attempting to do right here. So the idea, as we start to go through this, and that's what I'm going to do. Let me cut down the size here, cut it back down to 100. Well, that's better or not, but we'll work with that for a while. So this is what we're going to be taking a look at in here. Like I said, and I'm not going to read it to you, but as far as the language of the computer, we're not going to spend very much time on those first 15 or so pages. What they have you do in here, and we're not going to do it because we've already done a more complex app than this. When they talk there on page 16, the one-button app, that literally is an app where you put a button on it, and when you click it, it says the old hello world. But if you have any questions, notice how does the app work? They spend a few pages going over it. All right? I'm more concerned with us getting into working on this game and playing around with it a little bit. It's a kind of a stupid game. All right? And what I mean is, I think I've even shown it to you before. Our screen is going to look like this. There'll be a slider here. And there'll be a button here that'll, and a couple buttons, like three. I think there's 3 buttons. There might be more, but there's something here like generate number. All right, guess or something like that, and exit, or there might even be a clear. But the idea is you generate a number. Let's say that the number is 83. Well, this is a scale, and that's 1, and that's 100. So the idea is that you move that number is close to where, you move the slider here. So this thing moves, and eventually when you think it gets close to about 83, you click. And then based on where you clicked, it gives you a certain number of points. Okay? So like I said, the idea is pretty simplistic, and it keeps score for you. Okay, so I may have the buttons goofed up, but you get the idea. So that's what they talk about. And if you notice in here, so we'll take a quick look at what the app is supposed to look like. All right, well, what I'd like to do between now and whenever is to just get through these first 50 or so pages so we can concentrate on the last 100 starting next week when we come back, and that's building the game. All right, and I will have a finished copy of it for you also. All right, because I realize with some people it's like, yeah, I want to do it, but it's very hard to listen to you and be sitting there keying stuff in at the same time. So you'll have it. Now, in fall, as I mentioned, when we start, we're going to do a real simple program the first day of class. I mean, guarantee, I don't know what it is yet because I didn't write it, but we'll do a very simple program the first day of class. And if there's time, maybe 2 of them. But we'll have at least 2 programs done by the end of the first week. All right. But there'll probably come a day in class where you know, whether it's week 2, week 3, week whatever, that I'm going to say, okay, here's your specs. I'm going to give you an hour to try to write this. You don't have to turn it in, but then what we'll do is after that, we'll spend the rest of the period and I'll show you what I did. Yours that might end up being better than mine. You know, you might say, oh, I wish I'd have done this, and we'll do something like that. All right. Plus, we're gonna go over as many chapters in that book as possible. But I still think that you learn best by sitting and doing stuff. So the idea will probably be either Tuesday we'll lecture on the book and Thursday we'll work on programs, or vice versa. All right. I'm more apt to make Thursday be the day that we do these apps as a class, because that makes sure people come on Thursday. All right. And this is the class that's going to be the late class, because this is the 3 to 5 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday. The Android class is 1 to 3. And the 164, the DIP class, the Design and Implementation Project class, that's 10 to 12. So you guys don't have to come in here. There's no 8 o'clock class. The room will be open. I'll be here. You can always come in and use it, but you don't have to come in before 10. All right, so let's go through some of the stuff that's in here. And I've said this to you before. The guy who wrote this is from raywinderlich.com, and I will tell you, I've said this to you before, I would strongly suggest that you go out there when you get some time, join his mailing list. I get stuff once a month from him, but they've got free tutorials, all sorts of stuff. So come spring, if you're looking for a project, you know, that might be something that would pique your interest. They've got a lot of games out there that they work with and a lot of other stuff. So there literally is a lot of stuff that's out there. It's hard to see right here, but if you look near the bottom of the screen, when we get all done, this is what it'll look like. And you might say, well, big deal. It kind of looks like it's got a wood paneling background. All right. It's got a title up here. There's the bar. I guess there's the button, and there's some more stuff that's down here too. All right. So there'll be some stuff in here that you'll be really familiar with. There'll be a few other things in here that we've never done anything quite like that in here. All right. And it's funny, I've done a lot of reading on the books that are available, and to a person, because I thought of using this book for your book for spring. And almost to a person, what people end up saying is, oh, the first chapter of this book, one of the best books I've ever read. After that, it basically sucks big time. That it's not, the explanations aren't as clear, the projects aren't as good, etc. I have the old version of this. It was written for Objective-C. All right, I've got it upstairs someplace. I paid for it myself, and there's some truth to what they say. It's because all they've done in this version is they've just changed everything from Objective-C to Swift. All right. Somewhere on one of the hard drives or whatever that I have I have the version of this in Objective-C. If I can find that, I'll put that out there also. All right. I do agree with what he says up here. This is the top of page what? Page 6. Understanding beats copying, pasting. That's why next semester I don't mind giving you code and say, now we're going to do this. I don't mind that, but you have to, at a minimum, key in that code yourselves. Because being human, sooner or later, you will make a mistake. You will type something in wrong or do something, whatever. That's how you'll start to learn. He does have exercises on here where he says, try to do this, try to do that, and then when he gets done, he shows you. All right? Talks a little bit about history here. That's all fine and dandy. What you'll need, well, you've got all that stuff. All right? And I do realize that for some of you, it may be a hindrance that you don't have a Mac. People always ask me that, should I go out and buy a Mac? I know Stefan asked me that, and I said, no. So what did he do? He went out and bought one. All right. He bought it and he was paying for it, and it was the end of the semester, and he said, I don't even really want this thing anymore. And I said, I'll buy it from you. So I bought it from him and gave it to my daughter. All right, because she's a Macaholic. She likes Macs like Travis dislikes Macs. Talks a little bit in here about Xcode. Already, hopefully, you've started to realize some of the quirkiness of Xcode. All right? But again, I think that if you learn Xcode first, it wouldn't be a real big thing to you. I found this. I didn't make copies, but I will try to remember to go up during the break. This is, and it's a little old, it's a little dated, but it's Xcode 6 keyboard shortcuts. I'll take that upstairs during the break. In fact, I should just grab this, and I'll copy that to the folder, to your in-class folder, too. All right. I didn't find one for 7. There probably is. All right, but this is the one that I found when I typed in Xcode shortcuts. All right, so as it says, in the first tutorial of the series, you start by building a game called BullsEye. In the process, you learn how to use Xcode, you learn how to use Interface Builder, and you learn how to use Swift. All right, so that's a better picture. That's what the game looks like when you get all done. But he spends several pages creating this, and he could care less aesthetically about what it looks like. In other words, he doesn't do the pretty stuff here. He doesn't worry about coloring at all. He does that later. Because at first, he's just concentrating on the functionality. So you may or may not be able to see this, but these are buttons right here. All right? That's an information button, and I don't remember what that was used for. But what's that?
Undo, it looks like.
It's not undo. It looks like an undo, but I don't think it is. All right, this is the hit me. So again, it'll generate the number. So you're supposed to have 14. So you put it where you think it's close, and you click the hit me button. And based on that, it gives you a score. It's also set up so you can play another person. So you go back and forth against each other, and you can have rounds. You may or may not be able to see that, but it says like round 5 right there. These are the other apps that he has in the store, in the book rather. He talks a little bit about the language of the computer, and he mentions that when you go in and you type stuff in Swift, typically it gets broken down into some kind of an intermediate language, and from there it gets sent into zeros and ones that the computer can understand. Again, should I do a better job of explaining that stuff to you? Well, typically you don't need to know that. All right? And the author says, yeah, you can still write stuff like this if you know what you're doing, and you can find the right type of compiler, etc. But it's much easier to write something that looks like this. Yeah, I'd agree with him. You'll notice, again, we're on page 13 here. The author says, Swift is not your only alternative for iOS apps. You still can use Objective-C. If you read through Apple's own documentation, they are recommending that all new development work be done in Swift, not in Objective-C anymore. And that eventually everything that's done in Objective-C be ported over to Swift. All right, will that happen? I have no idea. All right, because Swift has, generally it has a much easier to understand syntax than does Objective-C. So the author says, I could have started this book with an in-depth thing on all the features of Swift, but it's better that you learn it by doing. Okay, so again, that's probably the best picture that he puts in there. That's what the game will look like when we get all done. So ideally, that's the way it will look for all of you in here. All right. So again, when you first build it, it won't have any of the coloring in here. It'll look very generic, and you'll change it as you go on. Okay? So he goes through this. Let's finish this page or so, and then we'll take a break. But he says the objective of the game is to put the bullseye, which is the slider that goes from 1 to 100, as close as you can to the randomly chosen target. So in some ways, it's sort of like the guessing game that we already worked on. You actually could change your guessing game, and instead of making guesses, you could use a slider like this. All right? It really wouldn't be that much work, and maybe we'll do that next semester. I don't know. As it says, when you're confident with your estimate, you press the Hit Me button, which is right there, and based on what you put in, it gives you an alert that shows you how close you were. If you're right on, you get 100 points. If the number is 86 and you guess at 0, you get like a point. I think at a minimum you can get a point no matter what you guess. All right. The closer you are to the target, the more points you score. After you dismiss the alert, a new round begins and a new random number is immediately generated. As it says, the game repeats until the player presses the Start Over button, which resets the score to 0. All right? So it says the game won't make you a millionaire, but even millionaires have to start someplace. Let's take a break, and when we get back from the break, we'll talk about how he works on this. So it's 8:49. Let's come back at about 5 after 9, please.